Moonlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting elongated shadows across the polished marble floor. The city lights twinkled below, a constellation of human existence that Griffin Hale had watched evolve for centuries. The penthouse sat in perfect stillness, the kind only achieved when one no longer needed to breathe. The silence had a texture to it, velvety and thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. Griffin stood motionless by the window, his reflection barely visible in the glass. The cold from outside didn't penetrate the climate-controlled environment, yet he felt it in his bones, a remnant sensation from a human life long forgotten. His fingers traced the condensation forming at the edge of the glass, the moisture cool against his perpetually room-temperature skin. The scent of old books and aged whiskey permeated the space. Not that he could drink anymore, but some habits persisted beyond death. A single glass sat untouched on the mahogany side table, amber liquid catching the moonlight, a prop in the theater of normalcy he maintained. His acute hearing picked up the elevator's ascent 12 floors below. Tyler Knox returning from his nightly patrol. Griffin didn't turn. The security system had already identified Knox. The subtle shift in air pressure as the elevator approached was merely confirmation. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked relentlessly, marking time that meant nothing to him anymore. Griffin's eyes, dark and unblinking, surveyed his kingdom below. From this height, humans appeared as insignificant as they truly were. Brief flickers of light soon extinguished. He'd stopped counting the years since his transformation, stopped marking the passing of decades. What was the point when centuries blurred together in an endless procession of nights? His hand moved to his chest, an unconscious gesture toward where a heartbeat should be. The phantom sensation of its absence never quite disappeared, even after all this time. The city pulsed with life below him, each heartbeat a siren call he had learned to ignore through brutal discipline and the passage of time. The elevator doors slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. "Sir." Knox's voice broke the silence, respectful but urgent. "There's a situation downstairs." Griffin didn't immediately respond. His reflection in the window showed no change in expression. Features carved from marble, eyes holding the weight of centuries. "What kind of situation requires my attention at this hour?" Griffin finally asked, his voice low and smooth, carrying the faintest accent from a homeland that no longer existed on any modern map. Knox shifted his weight, the leather of his shoulder holster creaking slightly. "A child, sir. She's asking for you by name." Now Griffin turned, a single fluid motion too graceful to be human. "A child?" "Yes, sir. Maybe 10 years old. Hispanic. Says her name is Holly Reyes." Knox's heartbeat quickened slightly. Griffin could hear it, smell the adrenaline seeping into his bodyguard's bloodstream. "She's with her mother. They're persistent." Griffin moved to his desk, fingers brushing over the antique wood. "And how does a child know to ask for me by name?" "She says—" Knox hesitated, discomfort evident in his posture. "She says she saw you in her dreams, that you're the only one who can help them." A muscle in Griffin's jaw tightened, the only indication of his displeasure. Dreams. Always dreams. Humans and their superstitions, their desperate need to believe in something beyond their understanding. "Send them away," Griffin said, turning back to the window. "Provide financial assistance if needed." "Sir, with respect." Knox's heart rate spiked again, the scent of fear subtle but unmistakable. "The girl described your private quarters in detail, things she couldn't possibly know." The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Griffin remained motionless for several seconds, then reached for the untouched whiskey, bringing it to his lips in a gesture of habit rather than necessity. "Bring them up," he finally said, setting down the glass. "And Knox?" "Sir? If this is a waste of my time, you'll answer for it." Knox nodded once and retreated to the elevator. As the doors closed, Griffin inhaled deeply, an unnecessary action that served as a reminder of what he once was. The scent of the approaching storm hung in the air, petrichor and electricity, promising violence from the heavens. He straightened his already impeccable suit jacket and waited. The elevator announced their arrival with a soft chime. Griffin stood by his desk, deliberately positioning himself to project authority. The doors slid open to reveal Knox first, followed by a woman clutching the hand of a small girl. The scent hit Griffin immediately. Fear, exhaustion, and something else. Something wrong. The woman, Marisol, he presumed, had dark circles under her eyes, her clothes clean but worn, but it was the child who captured his attention. Holly Reyes stood barely reaching her mother's shoulder, thin arms wrapped around a tattered backpack. Her eyes, large and solemn, locked onto Griffin's with unnerving directness. No fear, just recognition. The wrongness emanated from her. Not illness exactly, but something altered at a fundamental level. "Mr. Hale," Marisol spoke first, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Thank you for seeing us. I know this is unusual." Griffin remained silent, assessing. The child hadn't broken eye contact. "Holly," her mother prompted gently, "tell Mr. Hale what you told me." The girl took a step forward. Knox tensed, but Griffin raised a hand, stopping his bodyguard's intervention. "You drink from the tall glass, but never swallow," Holly said, her voice small but clear in the silent room. "You stand here every night and watch the people below. You think we look like ants." Griffin's expression remained impassive, but something cold slithered down his spine, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. "You have a room with no windows where you sleep," she continued. "The walls are lined with earth from your homeland. Sometimes you lie there and remember being human." Marisol placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "She's been having these dreams for months. At first I thought it was just imagination, but then..." "Then what?" Griffin finally spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Then they started coming for us," Holly answered before her mother could. "The men with eyes like yours, but different. They smell us. They know I can see them." Griffin moved closer, circling them slowly. The mother's heartbeat accelerated, but Holly remained calm, turning to follow his movement. "And what exactly do you think I am, child?" Griffin asked, stopping directly before her. "You're the king," Holly replied simply. "The one they're afraid of." A humorless smile touched Griffin's lips. "And if I am this king, what do you expect from me?" Marisol stepped forward. "Protection, Mr. Hale. We've been running for weeks. These men, they've killed everyone who's tried to help us. Holly's teacher, our neighbor, my brother." Her voice broke. "The police think I'm crazy. We have nowhere else to go." Griffin turned away, moving back to the window. The storm clouds had drawn closer, lightning illuminating the roiling darkness in brief, violent flashes. "You're mistaken about what I am and what I can offer," he said coldly. "I'm a businessman, nothing more." "You're lying," Holly said quietly. Griffin turned sharply, his movement too fast to be human. Marisol gasped, pulling her daughter back, but Holly stood her ground. "You promised," the child continued, her voice barely above a whisper. in my dream. You promised you would help when they came." "I make no promises," Griffin replied, his voice hardening. "Especially not to children in dreams." Holly reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She approached Griffin slowly, holding it out. Knox moved to intercept, but again Griffin waved him off. "What is this?" he asked, not taking the offered paper. "I drew it. From the dream." Griffin took the paper, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. A man with pale features standing among bodies, blood pooling at his feet. In the background, a small figure watched from behind a tree. The date in the corner was from 3 months ago. Griffin recognized the scene instantly. A night he'd rather forget, when a rival faction had crossed into his territory. He'd left no witnesses, or so he'd thought. How? The question escaped before he could stop it. "I see things when I sleep," Holly said simply. "I've seen you for a long time, and now they see me too." Griffin refolded the drawing carefully, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. If the child could witness his actions through dreams, who else might have this ability? What breach in the veil between worlds had allowed this intrusion? "These men who are after you," Griffin said carefully. "Describe them." "Twins," Marisol answered. "Pale like you, but with eyes that change color. They move wrong, fast. They found us everywhere we went. The Vance brothers, hybrids, enforcers for Dorian Blackwell." Griffin's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Please," Marisol continued, desperation bleeding into her voice. "Holly said you would help us. She's never been wrong about these things." Griffin turned back to the window, watching the approaching storm. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his reflection, revealing the predator beneath the carefully constructed human facade. "If what you say is true," he said slowly, "then bringing you here has put you in more danger, not less." "But you'll stop them," Holly said with absolute conviction. "You promised." "I made no such—" Griffin began, then stopped as the security panel on his desk flashed red. Knox moved immediately to the computer. "Perimeter breach, east side. 2 intruders." Griffin's senses sharpened instantly, extending beyond the penthouse walls. He could smell them now, the distinctive scent of hybrids, neither fully vampire nor human. The Vance brothers had followed the child here, just as she'd predicted. Marisol clutched Holly closer, her fear a tangible thing filling the room. "They found us," she whispered. "How did they find us so quickly?" Griffin moved to his desk, pressing a concealed button. A hidden panel slid open in the wall, revealing an arsenal of weapons. He selected a blade, ancient and inscribed with symbols that predated his own existence. "Knox, take them to the panic room," Griffin ordered, his voice changing, becoming something older and colder. "What about you, sir?" Knox asked, already ushering Marisol and Holly toward a hidden door. Griffin turned, and for the first time, allowed his true nature to surface. His eyes shifted, pupils expanding until they consumed the iris, turning the whites to obsidian pools. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I'm going to greet our guests." Holly pulled away from her mother, rushing back to Griffin before Knox could stop her. She grabbed his hand, the first human to touch him voluntarily in decades. Her small fingers were warm against his cold skin. "You have to promise," she insisted, her eyes wide and desperate. "Say it. Promise you'll protect us." Griffin stared down at the child, this impossible human who had somehow pierced the veil between worlds to find him. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen reflected back at him in centuries. Not fear or revulsion, but trust. Absolute, unwavering trust. The security system blared again. They were inside the building now. "Holly, come!" her mother called, urgently. Griffin knelt down, bringing himself to the child's level. The movement felt foreign, humbling in a way he'd forgotten. He could hear the Vance brothers approach, smell their hybrid blood, tainted and wrong. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Of all the monsters in your dreams, why seek me out?" Holly's answer came without hesitation. "Because you remember being human. The others don't." Something shifted inside Griffin then, a tectonic movement in a soul he'd thought long petrified. The child had seen through him, past the monster to the man buried beneath centuries of blood and survival. The elevator began its ascent. Knox shouted for Holly to hurry. Griffin took the child's small hand in his. "I promise," he said, the words feeling like shackles closing around him. "Now go." Holly nodded once and ran to her mother. As Knox sealed the panic room door, Griffin turned toward the elevator, blade in hand. The promise sat heavy in his chest, reawakening sensations he'd thought long dead. Responsibility, connection, purpose. The elevator chimed its arrival. Griffin rolled his shoulders, feeling the power of his true nature unfurling after decades of careful restraint. As the doors began to slide open, revealing the first of the Vance brothers, a single thought crystallized in Griffin's mind. What had this child awakened in him, and once unleashed? Could he ever cage it again? Caleb Vance emerged first, his hybrid features distorted with anticipation, two sharp teeth gleaming in a smile that never reached his eyes. Behind him, Damien's hulking shadow filled the remaining space. The scent of their corrupted blood hung in the air like a chemical spill. "King Griffin," Caleb sneered, stepping into the penthouse. "Hiding in plain sight all these years. Dorian will be pleased." Griffin didn't respond. Instead, he let the ancient part of himself, the predator he'd kept chained for decades, rise to the surface. His vision sharpened, the world suddenly awash in heightened detail. The microscopic beads of sweat on Caleb's forehead, the nearly imperceptible tremor in Damien's left hand. Their fear beneath the bravado smelled like copper and rot. "The child is gone," Griffin said, his voice dropping to a register that hadn't crossed his lips in years. The voice of the king, not the businessman. "As are you." Damien laughed, a sound like gravel. "We don't need the girl anymore. We found you." He drew a blade of his own, the metal gleaming with a sickly green substance. Poison, tailored for vampire royalty. Griffin moved before either could blink. The blade in his hand whistled through the air, catching the light from the city below as he drove it into Caleb's shoulder. Not a killing blow. Not yet. The hybrid howled, staggering backward into his brother. "You've made a grave miscalculation," Griffin said, voice eerily calm as he advanced. "You believe I've grown soft? Domesticated?" He tilted his head, studying them, with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing specimens. "But I've merely been patient." Damien lunged, his poisoned blade slicing through the air where Griffin had stood a millisecond before. Griffin circled behind him with inhuman speed, driving his elbow into Damien's kidney. The larger hybrid crashed into an antique sideboard, splintering the mahogany. "Dorian sent you to die," Griffin observed, stepping over the shards of wood. "Did he tell you that? Or did he promise you glory for capturing the king?" Caleb, clutching his bleeding shoulder, spat on the floor. "He promised us your territory, your assets." A pained smile twisted his features. "And the little girl. Once we're done with her mother." Something primal roared to life inside Griffin. Not the cold, calculating predator, but something he hadn't felt in centuries. Rage. Pure human rage. He seized Caleb by the throat, lifting him until his feet dangled above the marble floor. "What have you done to them?" he demanded, tightening his grip until the hybrid's eyes bulged. "Who else knows about the child?" "Everyone," Damien growled, struggling to his feet. "Dorian's entire network. You can't protect her." Griffin's mind raced. Holly and Marisol might be safe in the panic room for now, but they couldn't stay there forever. And if Dorian's network was truly hunting them, the momentary distraction cost him. Damien charged, driving the poisoned blade into Griffin's side. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot and spreading like wildfire through his veins. Griffin stumbled, releasing Caleb, who dropped to the floor, gasping. The poison worked quickly. Griffin's vision blurred at the edges, his legendary strength already diminishing, but centuries of survival had taught him one crucial lesson: adaptation. He channeled what remained of his power, focusing it like a laser. With one fluid motion, he extracted the blade from his side and in the same movement buried it in Damien's chest. The hybrid's eyes widened in shock before he crumpled to the floor. Caleb screamed, a sound of pure anguish, and threw himself at Griffin with reckless abandon. They crashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glass exploding outward in a glittering cascade as they plummeted toward the street 60 floors below. The night air rushed past them as they fell, locked in combat. Griffin's weakened state made the fight nearly even, Caleb's hybrid strength matching his own poisoned power. They twisted in the air, exchanging blows that would have killed any human instantly. 20 floors from impact, Griffin managed to sink his fangs into Caleb's neck, not to feed, but to inject his own venom. The hybrid convulsed, his grip loosening just enough. Griffin kicked free, using Caleb's body as leverage to propel himself toward the building's facade. His fingers scraped against glass and steel, finding purchase on a decorative ledge. The impact nearly dislocated his shoulder, but he held fast, hanging suspended as Caleb's body continued its descent, hitting the pavement with a distant, sickening thud. Griffin pulled himself onto the narrow ledge, his breathing labored, the poison burning through his system. He needed to get back to the penthouse, to Holly and Marisol, to Knox. The climb was excruciating. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through his body as the poison worked deeper into his tissues. By the time he dragged himself through the shattered window of his penthouse, his vision had narrowed to a pinpoint, his limbs leaden. Damien's body lay where it had fallen, but the hybrid wasn't quite dead. His chest rose and fell in shallow, wet gasps, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Griffin knelt beside him, wincing at the movement. "The antidote," he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where is it?" Damien's laugh was a gurgling, horrible sound. "There isn't one," he wheezed. "This batch was made special, just for you." The room tilted dangerously. Griffin steadied himself against the floor, leaving a smear of his own dark blood on the white marble. "Then you've killed us both for nothing." "Not nothing." Damien's eyes gleamed with fanatical light. "For the future. Dorian's future." Griffin's hand shot out, gripping Damien's jaw. "What does he want with the child?" "She's special, sees things, knows things." Damien's breathing grew more labored. Dorian's been watching her for years, since she was born. A cold dread settled in Griffin's gut, heavier than the poison. Why? But Damien's eyes had glazed over, his final breath rattling in his chest. Griffin forced himself to stand, swaying dangerously. He needed blood, fresh, powerful blood, to combat the poison. But more urgently, he needed to get Holly and Marisol to safety. He staggered to the panic room door, pressing his palm against the biometric scanner. The system beeped in rejection, flashing red. Of course, the poison was altering his biochemistry too rapidly. "Knox," he called, his voice stronger than he felt. "It's clear. Let them out." Silence greeted him. Then, faintly, he heard Knox's voice through the reinforced door. "Confirm identity." Griffin leaned his forehead against the cool metal. "Griffin Hale. The first snow we saw together was in Moscow, 1962. You said it reminded you of ash." A series of mechanical clicks followed, and the door swung open to reveal Knox, weapon drawn, positioning himself between Griffin and the two huddled figures behind him. "Jesus Christ," Knox breathed, taking in Griffin's bloodied appearance. "What happened?" "Poison," Griffin managed, bracing himself against the doorframe. "Specialized. We need to move, now. The building isn't safe." Marisol stepped forward. Holly clutched protectively against her side. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, but there was steel in her spine. "Where can we possibly go? If they found you here—" "I have a place," Griffin interrupted, fighting to stay upright. "Off-grid, but we need to hurry." He turned to Knox. "The garage? The Phantom?" Knox nodded once, understanding immediately. "Can you make it that far?" Griffin didn't answer. The truth was, he wasn't sure. The poison was working faster than he'd anticipated, designed specifically to target his unique physiology. He needed blood, and soon. As if reading his thoughts, Knox lowered his voice. "There's an emergency supply in the car." Griffin nodded gratefully. "Get them downstairs. I'll be right behind you." Knox hesitated, clearly torn between following orders and staying with his weakened king. "Go," Griffin insisted. "Their safety is the priority now." As Knox ushered Marisol and Holly toward the service elevator, the child broke away suddenly, running back to Griffin. Before anyone could stop her, she pressed her small hand against his, where the poison had turned his veins a sickly black beneath his skin. "It's trying to turn off your light," she said solemnly, her eyes far too knowing for her age. "Don't let it." Griffin stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then, with effort, he squeezed her hand gently. "I won't. Now go with your mother." Holly rejoined Marisol, who pulled her daughter close with a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. As the elevator doors closed on them, Griffin caught Marisol's eyes, dark with questions and a wariness he couldn't blame her for. Once alone, Griffin allowed himself a moment of weakness. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor, his breathing shallow and painful. The poison felt like acid in his veins, eating away at centuries of power and resilience. He needed to move, to follow them down, but first. With trembling fingers, he extracted his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "This better be important," came the clipped response after one ring. "Avery," Griffin said, his voice barely audible. "I need you. Specialized poison. I'm deteriorating rapidly." Dr. Avery Chen's tone changed instantly. "Location?" "Heading to the sanctuary. ETA 40 minutes if we're not followed." "I'll be there in 30. Don't you dare die on me, Griffin Hale." The line went dead. Griffin pushed himself to his feet, using the wall for support. The world swam before his eyes, but he forced himself forward. One step, another. The elevator seemed miles away. By the time he reached the garage level, sweat soaked his shirt, and his vision pulsed with each labored heartbeat. Knox had the car running, the sleek black Phantom purring quietly in the dimly lit space. Marisol and Holly were already inside, their faces pale ovals in the backseat window. Knox rushed to Griffin's side, supporting him the last few steps to the car. "You look like hell," he muttered, helping Griffin into the passenger seat. "Feel worse?" Griffin managed, sinking into the leather upholstery. "The supply?" Knox reached into the glove compartment, extracting a metal thermos. "It's not much. Enough to keep you going until we reach the sanctuary." Griffin accepted it with shaking hands, unscrewing the cap. The scent of preserved blood, not fresh but potent, filled the car's interior. He was acutely aware of Marisol and Holly behind him, of the child's eyes watching his every move. "Perhaps," he began, glancing back at them. "Drink," Marisol said firmly, surprising him. "Holly knows what you are. It's why she sought you out." She covered her daughter's eyes anyway, turning the child's face against her shoulder. Griffin didn't waste another moment. He drank deeply, feeling the cold blood hit his system like a shock of electricity. It wasn't enough to counteract the poison entirely, but it dulled the burning edge, cleared his vision somewhat. Knox pulled the car out of the garage, taking a service exit that deposited them on a side street rather than the main avenue. "Route?" he asked, glancing at the rearview mirror to check for tails. "Circuitous," Griffin replied, recapping the now empty thermos. "We need to make sure we're not followed." For the next 20 minutes, Knox navigated the city streets in a complex pattern designed to reveal any pursuit. Griffin's senses, though dulled by poison, remained sharp enough to detect no immediate threat. Eventually, they merged onto the highway heading north, away from the city's glittering skyline. In the back seat, Holly had fallen asleep against her mother's side, exhaustion finally claiming her. Marisol, however, remained vigilantly awake, her eyes meeting Griffin's in the rearview mirror. "You promised to protect her," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the car's hushed interior. "What exactly does that mean?" Griffin turned slightly in his seat, wincing at the movement. "It means I will do whatever is necessary to keep her safe." "From what?" Marisol pressed. "Who are these people? What do they want with my daughter?" Griffin exchanged a glance with Knox, who kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Your daughter has a gift," Griffin said carefully. "A rare ability to see beyond ordinary perception. It makes her valuable to certain individuals in my world." "Your world," Marisol repeated. "The world of monsters." "Yes. There was no point in sugarcoating it. But not all monsters are the same, Ms. Reyes." "Marisol," she corrected automatically, then sighed, stroking Holly's hair as the child slept. "She's been drawing you since she was 4 years old. I thought they were nightmares at first, this pale man with sad eyes. But she was never afraid." Marisol's voice caught. "She said you were waiting for something, that you needed to remember." Griffin felt something twist inside him, that same tectonic shift the child had triggered earlier. "Remember what?" "She never said. Just that you'd forgotten something important." The car fell silent except for the hum of tires on asphalt and Holly's soft breathing. Griffin turned back to face the windshield, his mind racing despite the poison's fog. What had he forgotten that was so important a child he'd never met would know about it? After an hour's drive, Knox turned onto a narrow road barely visible among the dense trees. The pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt, as they wound deeper into the forest. Finally, they emerged in a clearing where a structure stood. Not the medieval castle one might expect from vampire lore, but a modernist compound of glass and stone, built into the hillside itself. "We're here," Knox announced, pulling up to the entrance. Griffin nodded, gathering his strength for the walk inside. The sanctuary had been his secret for decades, a place known only to Knox and a handful of his most trusted associates. It was off every grid, protected by both technological and supernatural means. As they exited the car, headlights appeared on the road behind them. Griffin tensed, but Knox relaxed slightly. "It's Dr. Chen," he confirmed, recognizing the vehicle. The sleek Tesla came to a stop beside them, and Dr. Avery Chen emerged, medical bag in hand. In her early 50s, with silver streaks in her black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind round glasses, she looked more like a university professor than a physician specializing in supernatural physiology. "You look terrible," she greeted Griffin, her clinical gaze assessing him immediately. "Inside. Now." Knox helped Marisol and the still sleeping Holly from the car, while Avery supported Griffin. They made their way into the sanctuary, where motion sensors activated soft lighting as they entered. The main living area was spacious and sparsely furnished, a minimal aesthetic that spoke of Griffin's centuries of accumulating and discarding possessions. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the forest, though currently they reflected only the interior against the night's darkness. "Couch," Avery directed, guiding Griffin to a long leather sofa. "Shirt off. Let me see what we're dealing with." Griffin complied, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the wound in his side. The entry point was small, but the surrounding veins had turned black, spreading in a spiderweb pattern across his torso. Avery hissed through her teeth. "Specialized is right. This is engineered specifically for your bloodline." She glanced up at him. "Who did this?" "Dorian," Griffin replied, his voice strained. "Through his hybrids." Avery's expression darkened. She opened her bag, extracting vials and instruments with practiced efficiency. "I need to synthesize an antidote, but first, I need to slow the spread." She prepared a syringe filled with an iridescent blue liquid. "This will buy us time." As she worked, Marisol settled Holly on a nearby armchair, draping her jacket over the sleeping child. Knox had taken up a position by the windows, scanning the darkness outside with military precision. "Will he live?" Marisol asked quietly, watching Avery inject the substance directly into the blackened veins. "He survived worse," Avery replied, though her furrowed brow belied her confident tone. "Griffin Hale is notoriously difficult to kill." Griffin's eyes met Marisol's over Avery's bent head. "I made a promise," he reminded her. Marisol nodded once, then turned away, moving to check on Holly. The injection worked quickly, a cooling sensation spreading from the entry point, temporarily numbing the burning pain. Griffin felt his mind clearing, though weakness still pervaded his limbs. "That's step one," Avery said, disposing of the syringe in a specialized container. "Now for the hard part." She turned to Knox. "I need your help setting up my equipment, and I'll need fresh blood, his type specifically." Knox nodded. "The storage room downstairs is stocked." As they left to gather what Avery needed, Griffin found himself alone with Marisol, who stood by the windows now, looking out at nothing. "You should rest," he said. "There are bedrooms down the hall. You and Holly will be safe here." Marisol turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Will we? You're being hunted. We're being hunted. How long before they find this place too? This sanctuary has stood undiscovered for over 50 years, Griffin replied. The protections around it are extensive. Magical? She asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. Some, he acknowledged. Others are more conventional. Either way, we have time here. Time to plan our next move. Marisol crossed her arms, studying him. And what exactly is our next move? Run forever? I have a life, Griffin. Holly has school, friends. The use of his first name didn't escape his notice. What you had was already compromised, he said gently. Dorian has been watching Holly for years, according to his enforcer. Your normal life was an illusion he allowed you to maintain. The words hit her visibly, her shoulders sagging as the truth of their situation sank in. Why? What does he want with her? I intend to find out, Griffin said, attempting to sit up straighter and immediately regretting it as pain lanced through his side. But first I need to heal, and you need rest. Marisol hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The first bedroom down the hall? Yes, there should be everything you need. Knox keeps this place stocked. She moved to wake Holly, but Griffin stopped her with a raised hand. Let me, he said, pushing himself up from the couch with effort. Marisol watched warily as he approached the sleeping child. With gentleness that belied his fearsome reputation, Griffin lifted Holly into his arms. The child stirred, but didn't wake, instinctively nestling against his chest. The trust in the gesture wasn't lost on either adult. Marisol's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she led the way down the hallway to the bedroom. The room was simply furnished. A queen-sized bed, a dresser, a small desk by the window. Griffin laid Holly on the bed with care, stepping back as Marisol removed the child's shoes and tucked her under the covers. Thank you, Marisol whispered, not looking at him. Griffin nodded, turning to leave them in peace, but Holly's voice stopped him. The bad man is looking for his heart, she murmured, her eyes still closed, voice thick with sleep. That's why he wants me, to find his heart. Griffin and Marisol exchanged alarmed glances. Holly? Marisol touched her daughter's forehead. Are you awake, sweetheart? But Holly had already drifted back to deeper sleep, her breathing even and peaceful. Griffin backed out of the room, his mind racing with the child's words. Dorian looking for his heart? It made no sense. Vampires' hearts beat, albeit slowly. Unless... He returned to the living area just as Avery and Knox reappeared, arms laden with medical equipment and coolers of blood. We need to talk, Griffin said without preamble. About Dorian. About what he might really be after. Avery raised an eyebrow as she set up an IV stand. Can it wait until I've got this antidote synthesizing? You're not out of danger yet. Griffin acquiesced, allowing her to insert an IV line into his arm. The first bag of blood began to flow into his system, bringing with it a rush of strength and clarity. Avery worked efficiently, drawing samples of his infected blood, mixing compounds, muttering to herself as she analyzed the poison's composition. Knox kept watch, moving between windows with the hypervigilance of someone who'd spent centuries protecting a high-value target. The sanctuary was secure, but old habits died hard, if they died at all. So, Avery said, as she injected a catalyst into a vial of Griffin's blood, watching the reaction closely. What's this theory about Dorian? Griffin leaned his head back against the couch, feeling the fresh blood work through his system, fighting the poison. The child said something, that Dorian is looking for his heart. That's why he wants her. Knox frowned. Metaphorically? I don't think so. Griffin's mind worked through centuries of lore and knowledge. There are old rituals, ancient ones, where powerful vampires would remove their hearts and hide them, becoming nearly invulnerable. Avery looked up sharply. Like Horcruxes? Griffin's expression remained blank. Harry Potter reference, Knox explained. But essentially, yes, the heart would be the vampire's only true vulnerability. If Dorian performed such a ritual, Griffin continued, it would explain his meteoric rise in power over the last decade, and why assassination attempts against him have consistently failed. But why would he need the girl to find it? Avery asked, injecting Griffin's sample into a centrifuge. Wouldn't he know where he hid his own heart? Not necessarily, Griffin replied. The most powerful version of the ritual requires the vampire to surrender the memory of the heart's location. It creates perfect security. You cannot reveal what you do not know. So he needs Holly's ability to see things, Knox concluded, to locate his heart. And once he has it back, Griffin said grimly, he would be unstoppable. A vampire with both the invulnerability of a hidden heart and the knowledge to protect it. The implications hung heavy in the air. Avery's centrifuge whirred to a stop, and she extracted the separated components, working quickly to combine them with other elements from her kit. If this is true, Knox said slowly, then we're not just protecting the child. We're preventing a power shift that could destabilize the entire supernatural world. Griffin nodded. Dorian with unlimited power would upset balances maintained for centuries. No faction would be safe. Not vampires, not werewolves, certainly not humans. Avery approached with a syringe filled with amber liquid. This should neutralize the poison, but it's going to hurt. A lot. She met his eyes steadily. And we'll need to repeat the treatment every 6 hours for the next day at least. Griffin extended his arm without hesitation. Do it. The antidote burned worse than the poison, like liquid fire injected directly into his veins. Griffin's back arched involuntarily, a strangled sound escaping his throat as the compound fought the specialized toxin. Knox moved quickly to hold him down, preventing him from tearing out the IV in his agony. The pain peaked, then gradually subsided, leaving Griffin panting, drenched in sweat. The black veins across his torso had already begun to fade, returning to their normal, barely visible state. It's working, Avery confirmed, checking his vitals. But you're not healed yet. You need rest and more blood. Griffin shook his head, attempting to sit up. There's no time. If Dorian knows you've escaped, he'll be hunting all of us, Knox interrupted firmly. And you'll be no use to anyone if you collapse from pushing yourself too soon. Griffin knew Knox was right, but the urgency of their situation pressed on him like a physical weight. Holly and Marisol weren't safe, not truly, not while Dorian lived. 6 hours, he conceded finally. I'll rest for 6 hours, then we plan our next move. Avery nodded, satisfied with the compromise. I'll prepare the next dose of antidote. Knox, make sure he actually stays put. As Avery busied herself with her equipment, Knox took up position near the couch, his expression making it clear he would physically restrain Griffin if necessary. You know I outrank you, Griffin muttered, settling back against the cushions. Knox's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Not when you're being an idiot, you don't. The familiar banter eased something in Griffin's chest, a reminder of their centuries of friendship, of battles fought and survived together. But as his body began to heal, his mind returned to the problem at hand. Dorian, the heart ritual, Holly's unique ability, and beneath it all, the child's words to him in the penthouse. Because you remember being human. The others don't. What had she seen in him that even he had forgotten? And how was it connected to the promise he'd made? A promise that felt increasingly like a chain binding him to a humanity he'd abandoned centuries ago. The question swirled in his mind as exhaustion claimed him, pulling him down into uneasy dreams filled with beating hearts, hidden in shadows, and a child's voice calling him back to something lost. 6 hours later, Griffin awoke with a start, every sense instantly alert. The sanctuary was quiet, the first pale light of dawn filtering through the windows. Knox sat in a chair nearby, his posture relaxed but vigilant. "Anything?" Griffin asked, his voice stronger than it had been. Knox shook his head. "All clear. Avery's sleeping in the study. Marisol and Holly haven't emerged yet." Griffin nodded, taking stock of his body. The poison had receded significantly, though weakness lingered in his limbs. He would need more blood soon, and another dose of Avery's antidote. But he could function. He was about to speak when a sound stopped him, the faint but unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel approaching the sanctuary. Knox was on his feet instantly, weapon drawn. "We're not expecting anyone." Griffin rose more slowly, extending his senses outward. 3 vehicles moving with purpose up the hidden road. Multiple heartbeats, some human, some not. "Wake Avery," he ordered quietly. "Get everyone to the escape tunnel. Now." As Knox moved to comply, Griffin approached the windows, scanning the tree line. The vehicles weren't visible yet, but they would be soon. Someone had found them. Someone who knew exactly where to look. The sanctuary had been compromised, and as the first black SUV emerged from the trees, Griffin knew with cold certainty that their brief respite was over. The hunt had found them. Griffin moved with preternatural speed, his body still aching from the poison, but driven by survival instinct. "Knox, get them to the tunnel now." The first SUV's headlights cut through the early morning mist as 2 more vehicles emerged from the tree line. Griffin recognized the lead car instantly, Dorian's personal transport, flanked by his enforcers. He counted at least 8 figures moving in tactical formation toward the sanctuary. Knox had already disappeared into the back rooms. Griffin heard urgent whispers, Marisol's frightened questions, Holly's sleepy protests. He had perhaps 2 minutes before Dorian's forces reached the door. Moving to a hidden panel in the wall, Griffin pressed his palm against an ancient wooden carving. The panel slid open, revealing a cache of weapons, some modern, some centuries old. He selected a matte black handgun and an ornate silver dagger that hummed with old magic, slipping both into his belt. "Griffin!" Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, medical bag clutched to her chest. "I've got 1 more dose of the antidote." "Save it," Griffin said, but she was already approaching, syringe in hand. "You'll need your full strength," she insisted, jabbing the needle into his arm. The effect was immediate, a burning rush of clarity pushing back the lingering poison. Knox reappeared with Marisol and Holly. The child clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide with fear. "The tunnel's clear," Knox reported. "But we need to move now." Griffin nodded. "Get them out. I'll buy you time." "Griffin, no." Marisol stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "We stay together." Before Griffin could argue, the front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and glass. Dorian Blackwell stood in the doorway, flanked by the Vance brothers and 4 armed guards. "Such a touching tableau," Dorian said, his aristocratic features arranged in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The mighty Griffin Hale playing protector to humans. His gaze shifted to Holly, and something hungry flickered across his face. How domestic of you. Griffin moved, placing himself between Dorian and the others. This is between us, Dorian. Not anymore. Dorian stepped inside, his enforcers spreading out around him. You've made it about much more than that, about rules and consequences, and who gets to decide them. He gestured toward Holly. About what belongs to whom. Griffin felt a cold rage building inside him. She belongs to no one. Everything belongs to someone, old friend. Dorian's smile widened. That's the natural order we've maintained for centuries. Power claims what it wants. Behind Griffin, he heard Knox quietly directing Marisol and Holly toward the hidden passage at the back of the room. Dr. Chen moved with them, medical bag clutched tight. They needed just a few more moments. Your enforcers violated our laws, Griffin said, drawing Dorian's attention back to him. They took innocent blood from a child. They will answer for it. Dorian sighed theatrically. Is that what this is about? One little girl? He waved dismissively. Take the mother as compensation if you must. She's quite lovely. But this rebellion of yours ends now. The Vance brothers moved forward, Caleb's scarred face twisted in anticipation, Damien's eyes glittering with malice. Griffin could smell the hybrid blood in them, part vampire, part something older and more corrupt. I'm not asking permission, Dorian. Griffin's voice dropped to a dangerous register. I'm telling you how this ends. Your enforcers face justice, or you face me. Dorian's facade of amusement vanished. You're weak, Griffin. I can smell the poison still in you, and you're outnumbered. Am I? Griffin smiled, and at that moment, the side windows shattered. Sal Monroe and Marco Briggs crashed through, weapons drawn, landing in perfect flanking positions. 4 more of Griffin's lieutenants followed, surrounding Dorian's group. Dorian's eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine reaction Griffin had seen from him. You would risk everything, the peace we've maintained, the order, for this. For justice, Griffin corrected. For the rules we all agreed to follow. The room hung in perfect tension, both sides poised for violence. Griffin sensed Marisol, Holly, and Dr. Chen had reached the hidden door at the back of the sanctuary. Knox stood guard between them and the confrontation, weapon ready. Last chance, Dorian, Griffin said quietly. Surrender your enforcers for judgment. Make restitution to the child and her mother, or this ends with blood. Dorian's laugh was cold and brittle. You've grown sentimental in your old age, Griffin. It doesn't become you. He nodded almost imperceptibly, and the Vance brothers lunged forward. The room erupted into chaos. Caleb Vance reached Griffin first, moving with unnatural speed. Griffin sidestepped, using his opponent's momentum against him, and drove an elbow into Caleb's spine. The hybrid crashed into a bookshelf, but recovered instantly, snarling. Damien attacked from the left, a silver blade glinting in his hand. Griffin caught his wrist, feeling the bones grind under his grip, but Damien twisted free with inhuman flexibility. The blade sliced across Griffin's forearm, leaving a burning trail of pain. Around them, the sanctuary became a battlefield. Sal and Marco engaged Dorian's guards with ruthless efficiency. Knox had pushed Marisol, Holly, and Dr. Chen behind him, firing controlled bursts at any of Dorian's people who ventured too close to the escape route. Griffin felt the antidote Dr. Chen had given him burning through his veins, pushing back the weakness. He moved with increasing fluidity, ducking beneath Caleb's wild swing, and delivering a punishing blow to his ribs. Bone cracked beneath his fist. Damien circled more cautiously, blade weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. "You should have stayed down," he hissed. "We would have made it quick." "Like you did with Holly?" Griffin's voice was deadly calm. "A child?" Something like shame flickered across Damien's face before his features hardened again. "Orders are orders." "Wrong answer." Griffin moved with the full speed of his ancient power, crossing the space between them faster than human eyes could track. His hand closed around Damien's throat, lifting him off the ground. "Orders don't absolve atrocity." Across the room, Dorian remained untouched in the center of the chaos, watching with calculated interest. As Griffin slammed Damien into the wall, pinning him there with one hand, Dorian's voice cut through the sounds of combat. "Enough!" The single word carried power, freezing everyone in place. Even Griffin felt its compulsion, though he resisted it, maintaining his grip on Damien's throat. "You've made your point, Griffin," Dorian said, straightening his immaculate suit jacket. "Let's discuss this like the civilized beings we pretend to be." Griffin didn't release Damien. "There's nothing to discuss. Your enforcers took innocent blood. They violated our most sacred law. And if they did?" Dorian spread his hands. "What would you have me do? Execute my own men for sampling what was there for the taking?" "Yes." Griffin's answer was immediate and absolute. A tense silence followed. Dorian's eyes narrowed as he reassessed Griffin, seeing something new, or perhaps something very old that had been dormant too long. "You're serious," Dorian said finally. "Deadly." Griffin released Damien, who slumped to the floor, gasping. "The Vance brothers face justice for what they did, and full restitution will be made to the child and her mother." Dorian's laugh was incredulous. "Restitution? For humans? Have you lost your mind completely?" Griffin moved toward Dorian, ignoring the weapons that swung in his direction. "Perhaps I found it again." He stopped directly before Dorian, close enough to see the flecks of crimson in the other vampire's irises. "Here's what happens next. The Vance brothers surrender to my custody. You withdraw your protection from them. They face the full judgment of our laws. And if I refuse?" Dorian's voice was soft, dangerous. "Then I call for a conclave," Griffin said. "I present evidence of your enforcers' actions to the other lords. I remind them that even we have lines we do not cross, that children have always been protected." Dorian's confidence faltered visibly. A conclave hadn't been called in over a century. It would bring every vampire lord from across the continent, force them to take sides. The potential for a wider conflict was enormous. "You would risk civil war over this?" Dorian asked. "I would end this tonight," Griffin countered, "one way or another." The sanctuary fell silent as everyone waited for Dorian's response. Even the Vance brothers had gone still, watching their master with wary eyes. Finally, Dorian's shoulders relaxed infinitesimally. "Very well, take them." He gestured dismissively at the Vance brothers. "They acted without my explicit approval anyway." Caleb Vance surged to his feet. "Lord Blackwell, you can't—" Silence. Dorian didn't raise his voice, but Caleb recoiled as if struck. "You've become a liability. Both of you." His gaze shifted to Griffin. "They're yours to judge. Consider it a gesture of goodwill between old friends." Griffin nodded to Sal and Marco, who moved to secure the Vance brothers. Damien submitted without resistance, but Caleb tensed, eyes darting toward the exit. "Don't," Griffin warned. "It will only make things worse for you." After a moment of calculation, Caleb's shoulders slumped in defeat. Sal bound his wrists with specialized restraints designed to hold hybrid strength. And the restitution? Griffin pressed, not willing to let Dorian escape so easily. Dorian's smile was cold. What could these humans possibly need that would satisfy you? Protection, Griffin said. For their neighborhood, their community. No feeding there, ever. And financial security for Holly's future. Absurd, Dorian scoffed. Next, you'll demand we reveal ourselves to them, perhaps apologize for our nature. Not our nature, Griffin corrected. Our choices. There's a difference. From the back of the room came a small voice. Mr. Griffin? Everyone turned. Holly stood in the doorway of the hidden passage, having slipped away from her mother's protection. She held something in her hand, a folded piece of paper. Holly, no. Marisol appeared behind her, reaching for her daughter, but the child had already started across the room. Griffin moved instantly to intercept her. Placing himself between Holly and Dorian, he knelt down to her level. You should be with your mother, little one. Holly's eyes were solemn, far older than her years. I made this for you. She held out the paper. To say thank you. Griffin took it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a crayon drawing. In childish strokes, she had depicted him standing beside her and her mother, all holding hands. Above them, a bright yellow sun shone down. In the corner, dark shapes, monsters, were running away. Something shifted inside Griffin, a tectonic movement in a heart he'd thought long calcified. He looked up at Dorian, holding the drawing where the other vampire could see it. This is why, he said simply. This is what we protect. Dorian stared at the drawing, his expression unreadable. For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his eyes, perhaps a memory of his own humanity, buried beneath centuries of power and predation. Take the child away, Dorian said finally, his voice oddly subdued. We will discuss terms. Griffin nodded to Knox, who gently guided Holly back to her mother. Marisol gathered her daughter close, her eyes never leaving Griffin's face. Wary, grateful, questioning. Go with Dr. Chen, Griffin told them. She'll take you somewhere safe until this is settled. As they disappeared into the passage, Griffin turned back to Dorian. We settle this now. Complete protection for their neighborhood, a trust fund for Holly's education, and your word, binding on all who follow you, that no harm comes to them or theirs. Dorian studied him for a long moment. You know this sets a dangerous precedent. Perhaps it's one we need, Griffin replied. After what seemed an eternity, Dorian nodded once. Very well, I'll agree to your terms, with one condition of my own. Griffin waited, wary of whatever Dorian might demand. You take responsibility for them, Dorian said. These humans are under your protection now, not mine. Whatever consequences come from this attachment, they're yours to bear. Agreed, Griffin said without hesitation. Dorian's smile was knowing, almost sad. You always were different from the rest of us, Griffin. I used to think it was weakness. He glanced at the drawing still in Griffin's hand. Perhaps I was wrong. With that, Dorian turned and walked toward the shattered doorway, his remaining guards falling in behind him. At the threshold, he paused. The Vance brothers' trial will be public. The other lords will want to witness it. As is their right, Griffin acknowledged. And afterward? Dorian asked. What then? Do we return to our careful balance? Or has something fundamental changed? Griffin considered the question. I think we both know the answer to that. Dorian nodded once more, then vanished into the growing daylight, his footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. The sanctuary fell quiet. Griffin's people secured the Vance brothers, leading them away to cells deep beneath the property. Knox returned from seeing Dr. Chen, Marisol, and Holly safely to the escape vehicles. "It's done?" Knox asked. "For now," Griffin replied, still holding Holly's drawing. "Have Sal take them to the safe house in the mountains. I'll join them once the trial is complete." Knox nodded, then hesitated. "What you did tonight, challenging Dorian like that, it changes things." "It was time for change," Griffin said simply. Left alone in the sanctuary, Griffin surveyed the destruction around him. Centuries of careful neutrality, of balance maintained through compromise and calculated indifference, lay shattered like the windows and furniture. He looked down at Holly's drawing again. 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. So simple, so human a vision of protection and connection. 3 days later, Griffin stood on the porch of the mountain safe house, watching as Holly chased fireflies in the twilight. Marisol sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket against the evening chill. The Vance brothers' trial had been swift and final. Justice delivered according to the ancient laws they had violated. "Is it really over?" Marisol asked as Griffin joined her. "Yes," he said. "Dorian has withdrawn his claim. The trust fund is established. Your neighborhood is under protection." She studied his face. "And what happens to us now?" Griffin watched Holly leap for a firefly, her laughter carrying across the clearing. "That depends on what you want." "Safety," Marisol said immediately. "A normal life for Holly." "You'll have that," Griffin promised. "But there's something else you should know." He hesitated, then continued. "What happened to Holly? It left a mark, not just emotional. The blood they took from her, it created a connection. She'll need protection beyond what normal humans require." Marisol tensed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she's part of our world now, whether we wish it or not, and she'll need guidance." "From you?" Marisol's voice held equal parts fear and hope. Griffin nodded. "If you'll allow it." Marisol was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughter dance among the fireflies. "You saved us," she said finally. "You risked everything for a child you barely knew." She turned to him. "Why?" Griffin considered the question, searching for the truth beneath centuries of careful isolation. "Because she reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That connection matters. That some things are worth protecting, even at great cost." Holly's laughter rang out again as she captured a firefly between her cupped hands, its glow illuminating her delighted face. "She can see in the dark now," Marisol said softly. "Since that night. She doesn't know it's not normal." Griffin nodded. "There will be other changes, subtle at first. I can help her understand them when the time comes." "And us?" Marisol asked, the question hanging between them. Griffin turned to her, seeing the courage in her eyes, the fierce protectiveness that matched his own. "That's for you to decide." As the night deepened around them, Holly released her captured firefly, watching it spiral upward into the darkness. Its tiny light joined others, a constellation of living stars above the clearing. Griffin felt something unfold within him, a sensation he hadn't experienced in centuries. Hope. In the distance, a wolf howled, acknowledging the ancient predator in their midst. But Griffin's attention remained on the child and her mother, on the fragile human connection he had found and fought to protect. The fireflies danced in the summer air, their ephemeral lights reflecting in Holly's eyes as she turned to wave at him. And for the first time in more years than he could count, Griffin Hale, Vampire King, raised his hand and waved back, embracing the simple human gesture and all it promised.